The mansion was alive with a frantic energy that no amount of wealth or luxury could suppress. In the grand hallway, golden chandeliers flickered as if echoing the tension in the air. Doctors hurried past, their white coats flapping, carrying urgent reports and medical equipment. Nurses whispered to each other in low, hurried tones, glancing nervously at the polished oak doors that led to the child's room. Every step of the millionaire parents echoed off the marble floors, a desperate rhythm of fear and anticipation. Inside the room, the child lay motionless, his small chest rising and falling with an agonizingly slow rhythm. His tiny hands were pale and fragile, almost transparent under the sterile hospital lights that had been installed in the mansion to ensure immediate care. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, a mechanical chorus of beeps and whirs that seemed both futile and cruel. The parents hovered near the bed, holding each other's hands tightly, unable to speak, their eyes red from tears they hadn't allowed themselves to shed until now. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and rain tapped a solemn rhythm against the glass. It was as if even nature itself mourned the possible loss within those walls. The child's nurse shook her head silently at the parents, her expression grim, but she could not bring herself to voice the words that everyone feared, that the boy might not see another hour. The air was thick with fear, the kind that makes time crawl, each second heavier than the last. Through the tension, the quiet sound of soft footsteps approached. The young maid entered, carrying nothing but a calm presence, her eyes fixed on the child. She knelt beside the tiny bed, gently taking the child's hand in hers, her touch steady and reassuring. She whispered softly, words almost lost in the hum of machines, as if speaking directly to his fragile heart. The room seemed to pause, the chaos fading into the background as her unwavering focus anchored the moment. Though no one could know if she could save him, in that instant, she became the only thread of hope holding the room together. The maid stayed close to the child, her eyes scanning every monitor, every tiny movement, every shallow breath. Around her, the room buzzed with the tension of doctors whispering urgent updates and the parents' stifled sobs, but she seemed to exist in a world apart. There was a quiet authority in her demeanor, one that demanded attention without a word. She adjusted the child's blanket with gentle precision, making sure he was comfortable, whispering soothing phrases that seemed to carry a strange, calming power. The parents watched her, a mixture of awe and desperation in their eyes. "Who is she, really?" the mother murmured, clutching her husband's arm. The maid didn't answer, she didn't need to. Her hands moved with careful intent, stroking the child's hair, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, murmuring softly about warmth, hope, and life. The doctors shook their heads slightly, exchanging glances that said she was wasting her time, yet there was something undeniable in her presence that demanded they pause. Her lips moved in soft, almost inaudible chants, words in a language no one recognized, yet the air in the room seemed to shift. Machines still beeped, but the rhythm slowed, almost syncing with the gentle pulse of her voice. Outside the child's fragile body, she carefully prepared herbal tinctures and natural remedies, her movements meticulous, deliberate, as if guided by an unspoken knowledge passed down through generations. Minutes dragged like hours. The parents leaned closer, fear etching every line of their faces. "It's hopeless," whispered the father, though he couldn't meet her eyes. The maid turned to him then, her gaze calm but unyielding. "Do not lose faith," she said softly. "There is still time. Trust me." There was a conviction in her voice that chilled and comforted all at once. Despite the overwhelming despair surrounding them, something inside the parents stirred, a fragile, flickering hope that perhaps, against all reason, the impossible could happen. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting, as the maid focused entirely on the child. She adjusted his tiny hand in hers, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and whispered, "Stay with me, fight, my little one. We are not done yet." Even the doctors paused in mid-motion, sensing the extraordinary resolve emanating from this quiet, determined figure. She wasn't just a maid, she was something more, something no one could yet comprehend. The minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last, yet the maid moved with a quiet determination that seemed impervious to time. She poured her focus into every detail, the child's breathing, the subtle changes in his pulse, the faint flickers of color returning to his skin. Her hands were gentle but precise, as if guided by an invisible force, massaging tiny muscles, adjusting the position of the blankets, and wiping away the sweat forming on his delicate forehead. Every movement carried purpose, an intimate understanding of life itself. Around her, the doctors were growing anxious, their whispers sharper, tinged with frustration. "There's nothing more we can do," one muttered, checking the monitors yet again. The maid barely flinched. She worked methodically, blending rare herbal tinctures she had brought from a hidden satchel with a soft murmur of incantations that sounded almost like music. The words were unfamiliar to everyone present, but they seemed to ripple through the air, subtle but undeniable, as if they carried energy that no machine could measure. The parents clung to each other, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. They watched her every move, not understanding the ritual unfolding before them but sensing that she was their only lifeline. "How is she doing that?" the mother whispered, tears streaming freely now. The father could only shake his head, unable to respond, mesmerized by the quiet authority she commanded. Even the monitors, with their relentless beeping, seemed to respond to her presence. The child's breathing, previously shallow and erratic, began to slow, synchronizing almost with the rhythm of the maid's whispered chants. It was subtle, so subtle that only the most attentive observer could notice, but it was there. A faint blush of life returned to the boy's cheeks. The maid continued without pause, her eyes never leaving the child's face. She adjusted the temperature of the room, dabbed cooling liquid to his lips, and softly stroked his tiny hands. Her voice carried reassurance and command at once, a strange combination that penetrated the room like sunlight through a storm. It was a careful dance between knowledge and instinct, science and something far beyond it, and everyone watching could feel it. The impossible was happening, slowly but undeniably. Even the doctors, skeptical and trained in their methods, exchanged glances they could not articulate. They were witnessing something they could not explain, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on them. The child's tiny chest rose and fell more steadily now, the first real sign of hope, and the maid, still kneeling by his side, allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible smile. She knew they were on the edge of a miracle, and she would not let them fall. The room was tense beyond measure. Each tick of the clock sounded like a drumbeat in the parents' ears, echoing the fear that gripped their hearts. The child's breaths were shallow, each one seeming more fragile than the last, and the machine's relentless beeping underscored the gravity of the situation. The parents huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wet with helplessness, barely daring to hope. Every whispered word from the doctors felt like a hammer striking their fragile sense of security. Yet the maid remained calm, kneeling beside the bed, her hands steady as she held the child's tiny fingers. She spoke softly, her words a blend of encouragement and command, a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the boy's faltering pulse. Her hands moved with deliberate care, massaging warmth into his arms and legs, adjusting the blankets to protect him from the cold of the air-conditioned room. Each movement was precise, purposeful, and filled with an almost imperceptible energy that no one could explain. And then, a subtle change. A faint color began to return to the child's cheeks, a pale pink that sparked a flicker of hope in the mother's eyes. The father exhaled shakily, gripping his wife's hand tighter, as if the touch could anchor him in this fragile moment of possibility. The monitors, once unyielding and mechanical, now reflected the smallest signs of life, a flutter in the heart rate, a tiny increase in oxygen levels. The doctors froze, disbelief etched across their faces. They exchanged hurried, silent glances, mouths opening and closing as they struggled to articulate the miracle unfolding before them. The maid didn't panic, didn't look up from the child. Her gaze was unwavering, her hands still cradling him gently. She continued her delicate work, murmuring words of life, her voice a soft but powerful undercurrent that seemed to tether the boy to this world. The child's eyelids fluttered, a weak, trembling motion that drew gasps from the parents. He twitched his fingers, barely, but enough to send a ripple of hope through the room. The maid smiled faintly, a quiet relief in her eyes, though her focus never wavered. She whispered, almost reverently, "Hold on, you're safe now. You're coming back to us." The impossible had begun to take shape. Against all odds, life had returned to the boy, fragile but undeniably present, and for the first time in that long, agonizing hour, the family allowed themselves to truly believe that a miracle had happened. The final seconds stretched like hours, each heartbeat resonating in the tense silence of the room. The child lay still, his tiny chest rising with shallow, fragile breaths. The parents clung to each other, eyes wide, tears streaking down their faces, their hope hanging by the thinnest of threads. The doctors hovered anxiously, instruments in hand, ready to declare the inevitable. Yet none of them dared speak, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding in the quiet, unwavering presence of the maid. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the child's fingers twitched. A faint, tentative movement that sent a shiver through everyone in the room. The maid noticed immediately, her hands gently adjusting to cradle his small hand, her whisper steady and soothing. You're safe, she murmured. The sound of her voice seemed to fill the space, anchoring the boy, urging life back into his fragile body. The child's eyelids fluttered, lifting slowly to reveal the faintest glimmer of awareness. A shallow cough escaped him, followed by a small, uncertain sigh, and the monitors, once a relentless testament to his struggle, now showed a steady rhythm. The doctors froze, disbelief and awe etched across their faces. Some shook their heads, muttering in stunned whispers, unable to reconcile what they were witnessing with the laws of medicine. The parents gasped, overwhelmed, tears of relief streaming freely as they leaned closer to cradle their child. The room, once heavy with despair, seemed to lighten, the oppressive tension dissolving into astonished joy. The maid remained at his side, her eyes soft with quiet triumph, but she did not seek recognition. She had done what was considered impossible, and yet she treated it with the humility of someone who simply followed her duty, and her heart. As the child's breathing steadied and color returned fully to his cheeks, the mother whispered, voice trembling, You saved him. How? The maid smiled faintly, shaking her head. It wasn't just me. Love, devotion, it never gives up, she said softly. In that moment, her role in the household transformed forever. No longer merely a servant, she had become a guardian, a protector, and an irreplaceable presence in the lives of the family she had saved. The impossible had been achieved, and the bond forged in that hour would endure for a lifetime.